Practice Quiz 1B, our second practice quiz. Sal works as an app designer for a mid-sized tech firm. They spend all day writing thousands of lines of code, which are compiled and committed at the end of the day. At the start of the next day, Sal's supervisor checks the first 20 lines of code for errors. So the population that we're drawing from are the thousands of lines of code that Sal wrote yesterday, since we're talking about the next day. And the sample, well, the supervisor checked the first 20 lines of code from yesterday. And that is actually sort of problematic because the sampling method, let's see, the code can't volunteer to respond, so it's not voluntary response, and it's not 20 random lines of code, it is just the first 20. The first 20 are easy or convenient to get to, so this is a convenience sample. And is this likely to create bias or to skew our results? Yes, it is. Not all errors come in the first 20 lines. Sometimes, if somebody is a morning person, maybe the first 20 lines are good, and then afterwards they get less good. Or if somebody is not a morning person, maybe the first 20 lines are not so good, but then the later lines are much better. So you might get a false sense of what kind of job Sal is doing. Something like that. Number 2. Mariana thinks that her social arts teacher isn't doing a great job explaining how to have a good conversation, so she decides to ask her fellow students their thoughts on how the class is going. Mariana takes a day to compile a list of all the teacher's social arts students, and then she uses a series of 10-sided dice to randomly select 7 students to interview in detail. So the population that we are drawing from, well, she has a list of all the teacher's social arts students. And she uses a series of 10-sided dice to randomly select 7 students to interview. So the sample would be 7 students selected. And we have a couple of things telling us that these are randomly selected. First off, the phrase randomly select. Secondly, we're using dice. So this is a random sampling, and that means that for us it is a simple random sample, which should not create any problems, at least not by design. So no problems with that because it's a simple random sample. Number 3. Franco is collecting data for WASC on students' experiences outside the classroom during the school day. He spends a day carefully crafting a questionnaire which he sends to all 1,478 students' school email addresses under the subject line, "Please respond." 3 days before the deadline for Franco's article, about 43.1% of the student body had responded to the questionnaire. With this data, Franco writes an award-winning article. So the population that we are drawing from again, is all 1,478 students are technically their email addresses, but if we just say that the students and the email addresses are the same, I'm okay with that. And who responded? Who was the sample? Well, 43.1% of the student body responded. Now, this was sent out to just everybody, and it doesn't sound like it was mandatory to respond or anything like that, so it's not a census, especially since they say, please respond. And even though this is a really large percentage, it technically wasn't gathered all that effectively. So the sampling method used here was a voluntary response, because, again, please respond. Whoever wants to will respond. And even though we actually have a pretty good percentage of the student body responding here, this is still likely to create bias, because you might notice that over half of the students haven't responded. So we still only have the people who really care a lot about this issue. Maybe the other 50+% of the student body has less strong feelings or didn't necessarily want to take the time out of their day to respond here. So voluntary response, strong opinions are more likely to be overrepresented, either strongly for or against or whatever the situation calls for. And if we are leaving out that 50% of people, or 56.9% of people who might have more moderate opinions, that means moderate opinions are likely to be underrepresented. If you think about it, really, it's mostly the people who either had really good experiences outside of class or really bad experiences outside of class who are most likely to respond in this situation. Number 4. Animal control often screens the animals it takes in for Lyme disease, which can be spread by juvenile ticks. Yesterday, 24 animals were brought in, and 5 of them need to be randomly selected to be screened for Lyme disease. So we're going to design a simple random sample to select 5 animals using a string of random numbers, starting the count on 0, 1. Again, how many digits will you use? Well, because we have 24 animals total, that means we need 2 digits. Another way of seeing that is that I told you to start counting on 0, 1, not just 1. Now, last time I started counting from the top down. This time I'm going to go from the left right. You can actually do whichever one you prefer. These 2 questions are really just to try to guide you towards, that should be 0, 1, not 10, and I'll make that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, up to 24. So what numbers are meaningful for us? Everything from 01 up through 24. The meaningful numbers are just what are we actually going to get data from. Anything else, we'll skip. So we're going to use the string of random numbers to find which numbers are in the sample. So for right now, looking at these 2 at a time, animal number 24 is going to be in there. There is no 00 this time. There is no 55. But animal number 21 can be included. And animal number 14 can be included. There is no 26. 22 we haven't selected yet though. That is valid. 43 doesn't work for us, neither does 90, nor 78, nor 80, nor 79, nor 81, nor 52. 20 is a valid number, and we haven't used it yet, so looks like animals number 24, 21, 14, 22, and 20 are going to be selected. So those are going to be the same answers for everybody, but depending on how you numbered these, you might have different animals. Generally, I kind of expect that everybody's probably going to have the alligator, because generally we're going to start counting from the upper left and then end in the lower right. But if you started counting from the middle, you might have a different animal. So we have the alligator. And alligators, I don't think, usually get ticks. They have very thick hides. Number 21 for me is rabbit B. Number 14 is skunk B. Number 22 is a dog named Helper. And I forgot to say that that was 14. And number 20 was raccoon B. And that is practice test number 2.